a poop-infused wildfire, a Dutch word that'll annihilate cabin fever, and writer and Outside Magazine contributing editor Marc Peruzzi tells us about the subculture of dirtbagging and how it's under threat. My name is Alicia Underly Nelson, and I'd like to welcome you back to a new year and a new decade of Travel Tomorrow, the podcast about what's new and what's next in travel. I've survived a really snowy holiday break in West Fargo, North Dakota, and I'm joined by my co-host, Joe Bauer, in Berlin.
Hi, Alicia. How's it going?
Delightful. How about you?
I'm swell, and that chuckle sounds like you are laughing at the fact that we've been doing this for 3 recorded attempts, trying to just say hello to each other.
It's like we haven't spoken to each other in a few weeks. It was a good holiday break.
It
now
was
we have to get back into
blissful as all get out.
Marvelous. And that's saying something because you were traveling all over the place, right? So it was.
Oh no, I meant the radio silence between each other.
It's pretty impressive that I have silence. I'm not normally known for that, so.
That's true. And if we're being honest, we were still communicating over the holidays.
That's true. That is very true. Just not in spoken form.
Not in spoken form. Not a fan of that.
Indeed.
Just
Indeed.
Little beeps in the old WhatsApp.
Yep, writer's right. That's how it goes.
There we go.
So do you have any New Year's resolutions for work in the new year? Anything that you're working on that you're especially excited about?
In short, no. I do not have New Year's resolutions. I'm not a big New Year's resolution guy. I don't like the arbitrary trying something new based on the calendar. If I want to try something new or want to have an idea, I generally go for it. And you know this because if I have an idea, I generally bug the shit out of you about it.
That is true. That is true.
What about you? Do you do the whole New Year's resolution thing?
A little bit, but I try to just do fun things. Like my New Year's resolution this year was to eat more fabulous cheese. So like that's totally doable. That's not hard. But for work stuff, I kind of tend to do it quarterly. So I'm not very exciting either. I don't necessarily see the new year as like a clean slate to start with. I try to do it and kind of reevaluate every few months and adjust as we go. But hey, I think if it works for people, you might as well. But I think New Year's resolutions should be fun and not stressful because there's enough of that, like people mentally beating themselves up around January 15th anyway. So like life is hard enough. Don't make it hard on yourself. Make something fun in January and I don't know, keep doing whatever works for you, I think.
And that took about 5 minutes for
it did.
Our earnest Alicia moment.
Shush.
I did generally think it was funny. I said, I'm not doing the calendar. I'm going quarterly.
I know, but I don't know. I don't do it when everybody else does it, I guess is more accurate.
That's true. You just do it when corporations try to project how much they're profiting or losing in the next quarter.
I was a salesperson for a really long time that had monthly sales goals, so yeah, that probably.
Oh, so there's an origin story to it. This is like the prequel to your resolution making is that you had a sales career and that's why you do it quarterly. It all makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. If I would have waited till January, I would have been out of a job.
There we go.
Instantly.
We made some sense out of that nonsense. So what are we doing today?
What we're going to be doing first is checking out our first stop.
Now boarding.
When you're camping and you poop in the woods, bury it, don't set it on fire. About a year and a half ago, some campers in Carson City, Nevada, started a wildfire trying to, quote, burn human waste in a hole. The campers were detained by authorities, and I wonder how they explained that one to their cellmates. What are you in for? Murder, you? Pooped at a campsite and set it on fire.
See, I feel like as we have learned from the recent news cycle, there's enough issue with wildfires in general. Like we don't need silly people starting them for absolutely no reason. These people have never been camping before. Or were they 12? Were they like 12-year-old boys?
I don't know how old they were. I mean, they were detained by authorities, so I tend to think that they were not 12, which I guess if you're 12, maybe that's a better excuse. And if you're a grown adult. I
mean, this is a really junior high thing to do.
But they're not, like, the junior high thing would be to set it on fire and put it on somebody's doorstep. But this was, like, I don't understand why couldn't they just bury it? Unless I guess maybe they were in the desert, hard ground, and they couldn't bury. I don't know.
Maybe.
Who knows?
But there's a hole referenced. Like, they were burning it in a hole.
That's true. That makes it sound like they did dig a hole, and then instead of burying it like you're supposed to, they thought to set it on fire. Not intelligent people, it sounds like. If you're in the news for burning poop and starting a wildfire rather, then that's probably not something you're going to put at the top of your LinkedIn profile.
No, I think there's probably some intoxicants involved in this story, too.
Most likely. God, I hope so for their sake.
Now, boarding.
So both of us like camping and actually think we have a little more knowledge about it than the people in our first stop. But I'd never heard about a particular kind of camping called dirtbagging until Joe forwarded me an article for Outside Magazine. And I called up the article's author, who is Marc Peruzzi, who's the contributing editor, to learn a little bit more about the dirtbagging subculture, because this is something that's been around for decades, but it wasn't really widely known. And there are new laws and attitudes that are forcing dirtbaggers and the communities that they typically camp out in to adapt and change. And that's all happening really, really fast. So I started our interview by asking Marc to define exactly what the word dirtbagging means.
Dirtbagging to me is different than all these other forms of non-recreational camping. And that's the term that the Forest Service and BLM uses for people that are kind of camping out on public lands these days. In that, with dirtbagging, you're pretty much chasing a passion, right? Whether you're a surfer or a skier or a climber, those cultures are just rich with this. And in the article, I talked about the late Warren Miller, who was a famous ski filmmaker that traveled from ski area to ski area back in the 50s and 60s. And he, at the time, there wasn't that much lodging, to be honest, at ski areas. So, and he also didn't have very much money. So he pulled a tow trailer behind an old truck and slept in that and did all his editing in there. And, at the time there, a few towns had hostels, like really affordable hostels where young people living the dream could go stay for a few dollars a night, but a wealth of lodging wasn't really there for them. And those ski areas actually paid Warren Miller by giving him land for his films, and he died a very rich man a few years ago because of that. It's a bit like if you think about the way churches and cities grew up around churches, and churches ended up with the most valuable land. The same thing kind of happened with Warren Miller, because he was at these ski areas in the early days, and just full on dirtbagging, and people would give him a choice piece of land in exchange for the footage, and eventually that land became incredibly valuable.
That's interesting that you mentioned the church, because when I was reading your story and kind of digging into dirtbagging historically, both for for surfers and climbers and all these different communities, there's kind of a pilgrimage element to it. I mean, they're not seeking a religious experience, but they're looking for that like really immersive natural experience. Do you think that's an accurate description of how the movement started and how it is today?
Oh yeah, I think that's actually a better term than the term that people usually use to describe these folks. Dirtbag is used lovingly, but most of these folks have been described as bums over the years, right? Ski bums, climbing bums, mountain biking bums, surf bums. But in reality, they're just creative types that are driven to these sports, and in a lot of cases, they kind of created the culture around the sport, right? Like Yvon Chouinard, I mentioned, he in the article, he's the founder of Patagonia, but he was also the founder of what became Black Diamond Equipment, and he would drive around from climbing spot to crag and sell climbing hardware that he created from the back of his truck.
Wow. So I love how there's that really kind of collaborative feeling between the people that are actually camping and the people that are creating product and the people that are out developing businesses. I mean, it's definitely a give and take.
Yeah, it's a give and take, and these are the places where our sports kind of change, right? So, Warren Miller did it years ago as a ski filmmaker, but still today, the best ski film companies in the country, they're going up to Alaska, and they're living a dirtbag lifestyle. They're either sometimes driving up and sleeping in a truck, or staying in some sort of a ratty hotel, and they need to be up there for 6 weeks at a time, so they can't live a life of luxury on their incomes. But the athletes and the filmmakers are coming back with footage that kind of is leaning in to where the sport is going, and that's where a lot of the development happens, is in these communities of what we call dirtbags.
So is there something that, is that really what these communities, the surfers, the climbers, et cetera, have in common?
Oh, yeah, it's something that they have in common. I mean, they all share the same type of passion, and I think, the climbing community is probably the richest, with people kind of camping out at Yosemite, but they have their certain meccas, and people kind of glom around that. Whereas with skiers, they're kind of traveling around from mountain to mountain, and mountain bikers are doing something similar. They're going from hotspot to hotspot, but they're not like going to someplace like Yosemite with climbers and just kind of setting up for the entire season.
So what do you think prompted kind of the change in regulations against vehicle camping? Was it just a volume issue? Was it new people on the scene? What did your research uncover?
Yeah, we seem to be just in the midst of that change right now, and as towns, mountain towns especially, are trying to figure it out. And I live in the Rocky Mountain West, so that's kind of my experience and what I've seen. But from what I understand, there's a little bit more pressure on surfers nowadays as well. But all these factors well beyond dirtbagging are coming together at once. So you've got Airbnb, which is taking rentals off or long-term rentals off the market. That, plus wage stagnation with this service industry jobs, that's kind of forcing people out of their homes in a lot of these towns, and they're these are resilient, independent people that identify with the place, and so they're not going to leave, but they might go sleep in their truck, and then there's also a financial incentive for some people to rent out the place that they actually live in as a vacation rental and go live in a van for a little while. So you've got that, and then you have classic homelessness, and other people kind of putting pressure on these lands, just as van lifers and another category of people called RV boondockers, or like a lot of retirees in this with really nice RVs, and that industry is growing like crazy right now, and they just kind of pop around from town to town, and that's how they want to spend their retirement years. So all these factors are just kind of driving it. Now it's kind of impossible for the towns to ignore it. Now they're starting to figure out how to address it, but we're just in the midst of that change right now, and most towns don't have a handle on how exactly they're going to regulate things.
As people are trying to find these solutions to kind of, affordable housing is sort of its own nut to crack, and the minimum wage issue is obviously related, but for the camping element of this really complex issue, how are cities and towns addressing that, trying to find some solution in the middle? What are some creative solutions you've seen that have worked?
Yeah, Jackson Hole is probably the best one that I've encountered so far. They have a lot of them, valuable members of the town, just like everybody else, or with full-time jobs, contributing to society. And whether they're a line cook at a restaurant or working in a ski or bike shop, they just can't afford to live in town, so they've been living in their trucks. So the town actually worked with their employers, and now an employer can buy a parking pass at the rec center parking lot, and also get their employees access to the services in the rec center, like showers in a locker room and whatnot. So that was a really nice thing to hear about, and I could see that catching on. In Telluride, Colorado, they built more affordable housing to again kind of get some of those employed people into permanent homes or seasonal homes, and to make that more appealing, to actually listen to that type of user, right? That type of user probably has a mountain bike, some skis or a snowboard, maybe a kayak.
Mm-hmm.
These are kind of gear intensive people, and so they built gear closets for all those folks at the units that they developed. So it made it much more appealing for them to get out of their vans and trucks and into at least seasonal housing.
Oh, that's interesting. That kind of leads me to my next question then. What do dirtbaggers themselves want? They need affordable housing. They need a certain amount of flexibility because they might not be around, correct? And then they need gear storage. Is there other needs that maybe cities didn't anticipate?
Yeah, well, so there's all different types of dirtbaggers. There's the kind that identify with a place like in Squamish, BC, which I wrote about in the article. There are people there that are super passionate climbers and also work. And in one instance, a woman has her daughter in a school system, but they live in a van because that's the choice that they're making. She doesn't want to give away her limited income to a landlord, and that's totally fair. But the towns need to kind of start thinking about how they house their residents in different ways, and there's no real broad brush as far as like, a dirtbagger might be somebody who's coming into town and wants to stay for the summer and climb, or they might be somebody that wants to live there forever, when they might just be there for a couple of weeks, right?
So how do the regulations against vehicle camping influence everyone, not just people that identify as a dirtbagger, but more traditional travelers as well?
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. I'm not quite sure where it's going yet. There are, there's pressure on these mountain towns, right? And vacation type towns. You've got high-end lodging and a limited amount of affordable lodging for vacationers. And so a lot of people have started looking at RVs and van rentals as a way to take a vacation. So and that's kind of been part of the problem in the Squamish area, is that you have people that they might be from overseas, they might be from another part of North America with very little experience actually camping or even car camping, and they're showing up and they might not know the etiquette or the rules, and that's where you start seeing kind of trash right outside of vehicles and bear country, and you see other issues, just kind of human waste kind of piling up in places. So the towns need to kind of get in front of that crowd of traditional vacationer who's trying a non-traditional approach to their vacation to get the education message out there. And it's also true that public lands like our Forest Service and our BLM, they have essentially a law that says you need to move your campsite every 2 weeks. Now that law isn't enforced universally, but people should know that our public lands aren't really theirs to set up a permanent home or a vacation home on for 6 months or 2 years.
It sounds like there's some definite tension between the notion of land for public use and for private use, and what the appropriate length of time is.
Yeah, there's definitely some growing tension, and because of all these disparate communities that are using our public lands, like you can't just say everybody's a dirtbagger. You can't say everybody's like the traditional homeless type of person that you might think about in an inner city. We have the Forest Service, I think, has identified up to a dozen different categories of people that are all kind of putting pressure on some of that rough, dispersed camping around many of our mountain towns. So there's naturally going to be tension, but as we talked about before, it's just like this volume and all these factors kind of coming together at once. It's making people open up their eyes to what's going on and to try to address it in a reasonable way.
So what's changed on the dirtbagging scene since this article was published? Have there been developments that people are excited about? Have there been setbacks? What's new?
I think that there actually have been. I'm not. It's probably not related to the article I wrote, but there have been some developments that I've heard about since that article was published. And in Chaffee County, Colorado, outside of the towns of Salida and Buena Vista, the communities kind of come together a little bit to try to address what's going on. They have a lot of raft guys in the summertime who are camping out on public lands, and they have traditional homeless, they have transients, and all these communities plus van lifers and the RV crowd coming in, and now they're trying to do the initial research to get a handle on it, and that involved getting a grant to have a really high quality app developed that allows volunteers, and they have hundreds of volunteers to go out and map a bunch of these off the grid type campsites and also describe the environmental quality of what's happening at those sites. And they'll take that information back and share it with their partners in the community, and it helps homeless advocates get a message out to people where they can find services, and brings those employers on as well, so they can start thinking about what's the best thing to be telling would-be employees about where they can live. You have in the construction industry throughout the West, you have people coming to build homes that they can't afford to buy, but they're building homes and they're living in RVs on our public lands and on the fringes of town too. And the message kind of needs to get from the employer to the employee about what's the right way to do that.
So for a general traveler, somebody that's going to be maybe trying vehicle camping for the first time, what lessons can they learn from dirtbaggers on how to be a better traveler, how to have good habits, how to respect the community, both the dirtbagging community and the community that they might be temporarily living in?
Yeah, I think, and these are just kind of lessons that I've learned because, I traveled around Colorado with my high school age son up to last year, and when he graduated, and we were going on the mountain bike, the high school mountain bike race circuit, and I was just spending a lot of time sleeping in our Honda, which kind of folds into a camper, and it's hard to find legal places to park where you're not going to be impinging on somebody's rights in a certain way, right? Like you don't want to be parking in a residential neighborhood where somebody has their permanent home. Nobody really wants to see that. So you kind of need to do your homework a little bit and probably get outside of town a little bit more than you thought you would, and find some of that dispersed camping, and just treat the landscape with a lot of respect, and pick up all your trash, and go find a pit toilet somewhere, and if not, get in town first thing in the morning and have a breakfast and use the facilities there. That's the way it's supposed to work. There was I think I mentioned it in the article, but Winter Park Ski Resort in Colorado, they opened up some of their parking lots to this kind of van camping lifestyle, which is taking off a lot with the mountain bike community, and they have tremendous mountain biking there in the summertime, and they just said, hey, you can park here overnight, but there are no services, so pick up after yourself. And it was really kind of discouraging to hear that people weren't picking up after themselves, and they were actually demanding services for free parking. And I think it kind of put the resort on its heels, but they're still experimenting on what they want to do. But if you're parking for free, you need to take care of yourself.
That sounds like there's a lot of discussions and solutions that people are going to have to figure out in the coming months and years to find that middle ground. One last question for you. Do you think that the hashtag van life and all of those kind of really visible social media movements might be leading people into this community that maybe don't have experience with the basic rules of camping or the outdoors at all?
Oh yeah, I think that's 100% certain. And it's the hashtag van life, but also that RV boondocking trend. They're similar type of animals, where van life is kind of that Instagram culture, but RV boondocking is more of a retiring boomer culture, and a lot of people from the Southwest who are escaping the heat in the summertime will just come up into the Rockies and camp all summer long. But people should probably do a little bit more research into what's legal, but also more importantly, what's right. It's not okay to be using a bush as your bathroom unless you're really deep in the backcountry with a backpack on, and even then you should be doing that right and digging a latrine. But yeah, there's quite a bit of education that didn't come along with the trend, unfortunately.
Do you recommend any particular place for people to go to get that education?
I actually haven't. I've never thought of that. I think it's just learning some basic camping etiquette, and maybe asking when you pull into a town, like, hey, where's a good place where I can camp? Hey, are there public restrooms around? And getting some advice from some locals.
So the entire time that I was doing this interview, I was thinking about how different the entire U.S. and to some degree the Canadian system is from Scandinavia, because when I was in Gothenburg, Sweden last spring, every single person that I met, even people that had lived in cities their entire life, was familiar with the Scandinavian right of public access, which means that you can basically camp anywhere except on the lawn of a private residence. You can put up a tent, you can collect flowers and mushrooms and berries, and people who seemed really urban and not experienced hikers or outdoors people at all had all done this. And I thought that was really different. And I was wondering if there was some way that the US or Canada, where this problem with dirtbagging seems to be causing a lot of tension, if there was even any way that we could adapt any part of this system. And Marc and I spent a lot of time talking in some comments that'll show up in the show notes that we're honestly not sure. The US might just be too far down this road of regulation. I don't know. Do you think, how is it in Germany?
I don't know how it is in Germany. I do know that anecdotally, I can say I have walked over off a trail, started taking pictures, and had a guy saying, you're on private property, please don't do that. And then, of course, I see the sign, oh, sorry. But it hasn't been again, anecdotal. I know in the U.S. that it can be very complicated in terms of you can think that you're in the middle of a field and really not anybody's property, but you are, and then that can be a problem for hikers or cyclists or whatever. But in Germany, it does seem pretty open. I have not come across anything in terms of not being able to hike where I want to hike. I do believe, though, there are pretty strict restrictions on where you could camp. I do think that has to be designated, and I remember I think the UK might be similar in this regard. I remember hearing some interview with about micro adventures where they were talking about you could go camping, like just take the train out, go hike a bit, and then camp. And that technically it's illegal, but it's not like something that's heavily policed. And I think that's kind of the same spiel in Germany, that you're technically not supposed to camp, where it's not a predetermined camping space. But I think it's pretty common that if you leave people alone, you just kind of do your thing.
And as I was talking to Marc too, I started thinking about, like, we talked a lot about how so much of this is population based, like the problems that are really having it. The places that are really having problems with dirtbagging is where it's often not the people that have been dirtbagging for years, because they're more experienced campers and they're kind of good at flying under the radar. They dispose of their waste. They're kind of taking care of things.
They don't set their
and
poop
doing
on
what
fire.
They've always done. Yeah, exactly. They're not the people doing ridiculous things. But as this lifestyle is, shows up on social media, and there's this overlap between like the van life campers that Marc talked about and people that are out maybe exploring nature for the first time. A lot of those people are coming from populated areas. They're not venturing too far, which means that they're going to kind of the same places. So you have more people in the first place, which creates a problem and makes things more visible. But you also have more people that maybe haven't camped before or aren't familiar with what to do. So they're going to make dumb errors, like not disposing of their waste properly or putting people at risk for bears or other threats like that. So that's something to think about too, is how much of this, like I live in North Dakota and I've visited places in the state where I can't imagine, like I could probably put up a tent and stay there for weeks and there would be no one that would even know.
Would it be legal though?
I mean, it would depend on where. And my contacts at the North Dakota Game and Fish Department are probably going to get cross with me for not knowing all the rules and regulations.
Well, but you're a dedicated journalist. Why don't you go set up a tent somewhere in a field in North Dakota and just stay there until somebody tells you it's okay or not okay, and you get back to us?
But see, the point is, that's what dirtbaggers did for a long time. Or they could even do it in a van or in a vehicle. But if all of a sudden I post a story that I do this and say, hey, here's a really great place that I camped, or I saw somebody that's hanging out and visiting, and 20 more people show up, then that's going to become the kind of problem that's happening in dirtbagging communities across North America. So I don't know. I think it's partially that when I was in Sweden, it seemed that like there was just so much land to explore that I was like, what happens if it gets crowded? And everybody was like, well, how would that happen? I'm like, I don't know. It seems like everybody goes out hunting for berries. Like, aren't there a lot of you in the same place? And it was just this big collective shrug. Like, no, it's fine. We just go to our spots. It's cool. Like, who would regulate berries? And I just thought, well, we have quotas for fish, we have quotas for game, we have seasons for things like that in the United States to make sure that the natural resources hold out. And they were like, but aren't you in a not very populated state? I'm like, yes, but everywhere has that. And they're like, nope, not every place does that.
Well, to be fair, there are regulations on quotas and stuff on, like, for the EU in terms of game. I don't know about game. That's not something I ever really think about, but I know there is for fishing, because I actually did a story about that where it touched on fishing quotas in the EU. So not usually my realm of expertise, and usually I could just nod along, but on that point I do know that it's not happy-go-lucky, oh, don't worry about it, and it's actually a pretty contentious thing. The berry situation, though, that I know nothing about. Perhaps, and I do know that is a popular thing, though, in Germany, to go hiking and just, snatch some berries, and I don't think anybody's gotten in trouble for it.
I just think that's a really different attitude between Scandinavia and North America then, because if in the US or in these really quite populated and popular outdoors areas in Canada, people see, a bunch of people and they think, hey, like, is that legal? Can that happen? Are you following the rules? Whereas I really feel like if the same thing happened in Sweden or Norway, people would be like, yeah, cool, of course. Like, that's not news. Of course they can do that. And I think it would probably take more for people to get upset. I mean, it would take, probably some serious violations for Scandinavians to kind of lose that acceptance. It's just really interesting in the way that we perceive people and the outdoors. So this is definitely a subculture that I want to learn more about. And I don't know, like, I'm kind of rooting for these. I'm rooting for, like, the hardcore dirtbaggers that are doing this because they love it, because it's the best and the purest way to practice their sport. Like, there's something really old school and beautiful about forgoing the normal life and like literally making this natural pilgrimage every season. Like, it's, I don't know, it's romantic, and I really don't like the idea of that being regulated out of existence. So I'm rooting for the dirtbaggers and hope that the communities can come up with a solution that works for everybody.
It is beautiful, and so long as nobody's setting their poop on fire, I think we can agree that it's a totally fine thing to do.
Oh, thanks for closing out the story. Everything in this episode has to do with poop. Thanks, Joe. You are also
It needs to get into all 3 acts of the show, because it's just such a hilarious thing to me that somebody set their poop on fire. Well, it can't be. The wildfire, not funny, but the setting of the poop on fire, and, you know, I think it speaks to our relationship. You set it up with a nice, beautiful, poetic celebration or rooting on of the dirtbaggers, and then I got to bring us back down to my steamy poopy level.
You're preparing me for my child's adolescence. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, Joe will send us out with a little language love.
Blah 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 blah.
And today our word for language love is uitwaaien. It's a Dutch word that literally translates to outblowing or blowing out, but it actually means to take a break by going outdoors and engaging in physical activity in nature, especially on a windy or cold day, so you get that cold, brisk, exhilarating rush of energy. So, Alicia, while you're out in the middle of North Dakota reporting for us to figure out what's actually legal out there, I hope you enjoy a bit of uitwaaien.
I plan to. I realize I've done this before. Like, I didn't know there was a word for it. So I love when we have language love like that actually teaches me something a word that I needed to know. I'm going to use it. And no one will know what I'm talking about except for you and our listeners and the Dutch people.
All those Dutch people that are listening to this podcast. Big fans of us, the Dutch.
And please feel free to correct our pronunciation. We might need it.
No, let's stick with ours. I think that'd be very American of us to say that, no, this is how you do it.
To insist that we know how to pronounce other people's languages.
Exactly. If they come back and but that also happens a lot to me where I'll write a sentence in English or say something in English, and then a German will tell me, no, I don't think that's correct. Like, well, it's my native language, man. I think I know what I'm saying. No, I learned it this other way. Like, okay, well, it's a big language, different ways to do things. Nope.
Humans are funny, aren't we? Like, we just like to insist that our way is correct, even though there's evidence to the contrary. How about that? It is the human way. Well, we hope that you can shake off your cabin fever with a little uitwaaien this season. And with that, we will leave you. So that'll do it for the first 2020 episode of Travel Tomorrow. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about one of our favorite modes of transportation, trains. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the podcast and want to let us know, please do us a favor and rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts.
And then if you want to do all the social media things, you can follow us on Twitter at traveltompod. We are at traveltomorrowpod on Facebook. If you have any ideas, thoughts, concerns, whatever, you can email us at traveltomorrowpod@gmail.com. Thanks as always to the Fiddle Revolt for the theme music. And remember to subscribe to Travel Tomorrow wherever you get your podcasts. Blowing out.